Western Teacher Live, talking about public education, unionism and much more.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Western Teacher Live, the podcast of the State School Teachers Union of Western Australia. And I'm very pleased to welcome to the podcast studio Natalie Blewitt, the Senior Vice President of the SSTUWA. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Bob, and great to be back on Western Teacher Live for 2024.
And I am hoping that whether you're a member or a non-member, this will be a helpful process for you. We're just going to go through how the process works for developing the Enterprise Bargaining Agreement, the General Agreement negotiations process. So we're going to tell you how members get to contribute. This is mostly focused around the schools process. We also have a very similar process in terms of the to and fro with the department from our TAFE members on their behalf from the TAFE committee and senior officers of the union. So it's not quite the same process for TAFE, but very similar in terms of how we develop the log of claims. So Natalie, what is a log of claims is what the union puts to the employer in order to start discussions about a new general agreement. And at the moment, at least, those general agreements then set the industrial conditions and perhaps most importantly, the salary levels for all teachers and school leaders. And so how does that log of claims get developed?
So the log of claims process is very extensive. It takes about 18 months to actually develop what we call a log of claims. It starts off with meetings, a number of meetings. We have input from members across a wide variety of forums. So that includes district council, out at branch meetings, conversations, and also state council. So what we call a proposed log of claims is how it starts. So the previous few years at State Council, our delegates to State Council have come up with a range of ideas and suggestions of how they want to see our current general agreement and award clauses improved upon. That then gets compiled together with lots and lots of other input from a variety of members across the state, and it goes to executive. So the proposed log of claims is not something that senior officers decide or executive decide, I think we'll change this or I think we'll change that. Members actually have an extensive opportunity to input into that process, which is why it takes so long. So when we actually get what we call a proposed log of claims, when we get to a stage where we think, okay, we've included all of these items together, we then actually take it to our State Council. So this year we actually have 98 claims, as many of our listeners would know if they're members, 98 claims. So that's not a process that is very quick to put together a proposed log of claims. But once we actually have that proposed log of claims, it then goes to our supreme decision-making body, which is our State Council. And at the June State Council of last year, we actually put our proposed log of claims to the members, to which we actually had a 4-hour discussion, a 4-hour debate, and we actually had 28 amendments to the proposed log of claims. So coming out of State Council in June, we actually then, the delegates at State Council decided, yep, this is where we're happy with this now, and then it actually came out to a membership vote. So the important thing I think for listeners to remember is that only members actually get to vote along this process. So the proposed log of claims went out to all schools and members actually had a vote and they endorsed the proposed log of claims, and then that is what became what we call the log of claims.
And there's two elements to that, isn't there, that what we're discussing? It's the schools industrial agreement and also the teachers award. And the industrial agreement is under the award, but both are important. Sometimes you do get changes to both. And that really important point you make is that whilst this is setting the future for all educators in schools, in public schools in Western Australia, only members of the SSTUWA steer the content of the log of claims and get a vote at the other end of the process. So if you're on the sidelines having a whinge and you're not a member, well, the answer is join the union and have your say at both levels. So once we've got that log of claims, Natalie, and that extensive process, is quite funny because there's currently 2-year agreements. So you pretty much sign an agreement and then you're starting the next set of negotiations within weeks. So it's a fun process for everybody, I'm sure. What happens once that log of claims is done?
Yeah, it definitely is an extensive process, Bob, and it's very cyclical. And you're correct. Once we actually finish and sign off one, we then start the process for the next one. So there's always something ongoing for the preparation of a log of claims. So once we actually have gone through that voting process and members have decided, yes, that is the log, it is then what we call served on the employer. So the president of the State School Teachers Union, Matt Jarman, actually takes a physical copy and hands it over to the Director General, which obviously the Director General from the Department of Education, and then we can actually start the negotiation process.
And that process, once it's underway, involves like sort of weekly, monthly meetings, and it sort of the process picks up as it goes along. I would think so. So on the negotiation side, you've got the SSTUWA senior officers and senior DOE staff, and that's a bit of a to and fro as you'd expect in any negotiation. Now, limited as it is these days from various legislation, the ability of Australian workers to take industrial action is, in fact, incredibly restrained after years of new regulations and legislation to sort of make it more difficult for it to happen. But there are still processes to follow, and we need to be absolutely clear on that, there are legal processes to follow. But the union can consider industrial action. And of course, what has happened in the current negotiations, and a reminder here, please check your e-news because that's where you get the updates, e-news and the SSTUWA website. These podcasts might sit up for a while, so there might be changes in what we're discussing right now. So please keep an eye on your e-news, keep an eye on the website for those updates. But currently there are some there are directives in place from executives. So what's the process for that industrial action to begin?
Sure. So once negotiations actually start, it can be quite a lengthy process. And I think this is where a number of members get a bit frustrated. And to be quite honest, the senior officers get a bit frustrated too at the slow pace sometimes of negotiations. But to give you a bit of an idea, we actually commenced negotiations for this particular log that we're talking about now, the one that's got 98 claims in it. We actually commenced negotiations in October of 2023. So it takes a while to actually explain each of the claims. It's not like we just read it from the paper. So for each of those 98 claims, to give listeners a better idea of how the negotiation process works, your senior officers actually sat with each of those 98 claims, prepared research to back up why each of these claims are important. We also came together with some what we call position papers. So each of those claims is presented to the department in extensive detail. Now you have to also remember that the Principals Federation is also sitting at the table and they've presented their log of claims as well. So the whole explanation of each of those logs actually takes an extended period of time as well. So it was around about November, towards the end of November, remembering we started in October. So it took almost a month and a half to 2 months to actually finish presenting our log of claims. So during that initial phase, we actually have an opportunity to ask and answer clarifying questions. So that can come from anybody at the table. And remember, it's not just the SSTU senior officers and the department senior officers. There are a range of other staff and members from what we call the government sector labour relations people. So they're the people that actually have the bucket of money. They're the ones that have the purse strings, if you like. So there's a range of people that actually sit at the negotiating table. So this process is extensive. We need to make sure that we explain everything clearly, and then we have an opportunity to negotiate on each one of these claims. So, Bob, you mentioned industrial action, and it's really important for members and for everybody listening to understand that industrial action is not something that is taken lightly at all by executive. And when we actually take what we call protected industrial action, we can't actually do that until our agreement expires. So our agreement expired in early December, which is why the executive had decided around about January time, once our agreement expired, that we weren't actually getting too far too quickly with our with our negotiations. So executive actually decided to take what we call the first stage, our first stage bans or industrial action, which is what you were referring to, Bob.
And in an amazing coincidence, once that industrial action was commenced under the Stage 1 directives, an offer was made, which is, well, who would have thought that might happen? So the DOE did make an offer, then executive considers that offer, and their decision was it's not meeting anywhere near what we need, so they then have to make further considerations. So they rejected that offer, and the industrial action under the existing directives has continued. And as I say, do keep an eye on the e-news and the website for updates as that goes along. So the employer's offer was rejected, and executive after executive had considered it properly. So that then continues on. The negotiation process and the to and fro. So I suppose at the moment the situation is that we wait for an offer. So let's have a hypothetical situation where an offer comes in and executive then decides, yes, this offer, the second or the third or the fourth or whatever, has met our requirements and we're going to recommend. So you then get to what you call an agreement in principle. And I think it's important for people to understand the difference, because quite often you'll hear the media or read the media saying, they've made if it's subject to an offer, but it's not, is it? It's not about the offer. It's about the decision that there is an agreement in principle between the two parties. That's the trigger for the next stage, yes?
That's correct, Bob. So it can become a little bit confusing. So when we talk about, I just want to take you back a step. When we talk about executive, for those of you who are not sure, the executive team for the State School Teachers Union is, of course, comprised of your senior officers, so the President, the Senior Vice President, and the General Secretary, along with 15 other members from across the state. So we have a broad range of views of our executive members from all sectors that make up our membership base for schools. So they actually bring their own perspective. They're from their own region, representing their own members, and those representations, as I mentioned, are spread all the way across the state. So we have a very, very good understanding of what's actually happening out in each of the schools across the different regions. So with regards to the offer, remembering we started negotiations in October, by the time we actually got to the 29th of January, we hadn't received an offer, which was when executive had decided that we were going to start our stage 1 actions, our stage 1 bans, if you like. So that, as you mentioned, Bob, did bring about or accelerated the process of the department actually delivering an offer. So on the 1st of March, which was Friday, we actually received the first offer from the department. Now, executive actually considered that offer very extensively. Executive met on the Saturday, so they were called in for a special executive meeting. We met on Saturday the 2nd, and at that meeting, executive decided, after much deliberation discussion, that they were going to decline the offer, which means that we then notify the department, the Director General, that executive have declined the offer and negotiations continue. We also put out information to our members that while we were waiting, because we had declined the offer, that the stage 1 bans remain in place. So, Bob, you mentioned the difference between an offer and an agreement in principle. So we can receive, as you mentioned, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 offers, depends on how we go and with the negotiation process. But to actually reach an agreement in principle, that's a bit different. So once we receive an offer, as we said, executive discuss it, executive debate it. If we get to a point where executive says, yes, this is actually a very good offer, then executive agree to that offer, and that becomes an agreement in principle. Now, that still actually has to come out to the members to vote. So if executive says, yes, we think this is a good offer, we're going to put this out to the members for a vote, members still have the final say as to whether they accept the offer or they reject the offer. So if the agreement in principle is accepted by the membership, voted on by the membership, then that actually then becomes what we then accept, and that then the process continues, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the next stages. If that agreement in principle is not accepted by the membership vote, then we have to continue the negotiation process.
And of course, the possibility there is that you end up in arbitration, and the ruling is from the WA Industrial Relations Commission, not members having the final say, or indeed the employers, but an independent arbiter, which takes the process out of the control of the direct participants in the negotiation process. So once we've done that, and we're only talking, I think we need to be very clear on this, it's not about the specific situation that's happening at the moment, because that is an ongoing process. But in the theoretical, hypothetical world in which we are discussing, we've now got a majority of members have supported the agreement in principle. That is then in place. What's the next stage? Because there's always a bit of a gap, isn't there, between an agreement in principle and it actually being signed off. And why is that?
So once we actually receive the go-ahead, if you like, from the members, I just want to take you back a step. You mentioned about arbitration, and this is some of the feedback sometimes that we get from members to say the negotiation process is taking such a long time, why don't we just go to arbitration and get it over and done with? The difficulty with that is once it goes to arbitration, it's out of our hands in terms of the SSTUWA negotiators and the department negotiators. So whatever the industrial umpire, if you like, if it goes to arbitration, once the decision is made there, our members don't get to vote. They don't get to have a final say. We have to accept whatever that decision comes out of arbitration, and it might be ones that we don't like. It might be conditions that we don't want to see changed. For example, it might be an increase in staff meeting time, for example. The independent arbitrator might decide that there's not enough staff meetings and there has to be more staff meetings. If that's the decision that's made, if we don't like that, clearly we wouldn't like that, but members can't have a say in that. We actually can't negotiate that any further. Once that decision is made, that's it. You have to live with that. So it's really important that the only time this would ever go to arbitration is if it gets to the point where the parties, being the Department of Education and the State School Teachers Union, simply can't agree. So arbitration is really your end and last resort, and it's not one that we really want to go to for those reasons that I've just mentioned. But if we actually have the agreement in principle, it's successful, it then actually has to go through a registration process. So it then actually goes to the West Australian Industrial Relations Commission to be registered, and that can take a period of time as well. So when we talk about how lengthy negotiations are, it is lengthy, and at times it does become very frustrating for everybody involved, but we actually have to make sure that we get it right. When we get down to the point where the words are really important, and it could be the difference between shall and will and should and could, those wording changes are really, really important. So once it's actually registered in the Industrial Relations Commission, that then becomes our new agreement. And remembering, as we've mentioned a few times throughout our podcast today, that only members actually get to have the say. One of the things I just want to mention too about once it's registered, there's the assumption usually that back pay will happen because as many of you will know that are listening, our red book, what we call our red book, actually expired in December of last year. So at the moment, as within the first offer, there is the offer of back pay. We could actually get to a point where the offer of back pay is taken off the table. So that one is always not guaranteed. We hope, of course, that as a gesture of goodwill that back pay will actually be paid, but obviously that's not guaranteed, but hopefully we won't come to that point in time. So once the agreement's actually registered, that then becomes the terms and conditions of employment, which, of course, everybody in our system need to actually work for.
And, of course, that's probably the most obvious and physical sign you will see when there is a new agreement in place, and that is new red books, what we used to call the blue book, although that is now online, which is your rights. So you can go online, you can search the agreement, you can search the award, you can search your rights. And often that's a really good first point of call if you've got an issue in the workplace to know exactly what you are entitled to. And then, of course, you can talk to your branch, you can talk to Member Assist at the union and to your local area organiser. So, as you can hear from Natalie's explanation, which was excellent, it is not a simple process. It is a lot of steps. It's very important because it literally decides the working conditions of every teacher and school leader within the public education system here in Western Australia. If you want to say in that, you need to be a member. So please, if you're not a member, have a think about joining. It's tax deductible and there are a range of other benefits too.
Just on that, Bob, now is a great time to actually join the State School Teachers Union if you haven't already joined. As I always say, there is always room for one more. So if it's something that you have been considering, or indeed you are listening and you're relatively new to the profession and are not sure how to go about doing that, you can actually get in contact with our growth team. You can also jump online and join online at www.sstuwa.org.au. Very simple way to join up. And as we've said throughout the podcast, only members get to have a say. So when we actually get to that point, hopefully, fingers crossed, sometime in the very near future, we actually get to our agreement in principle and it comes out to members to vote, then that is the time that you will actually be able to have your say. And as Bob mentioned, the EBA process, the next EBA process for the log of claims will start again. So you will then get to contribute to that. So if you're not a member, really, really encourage everybody to think about union membership for a range of reasons why. And you can also have a look at those on our website too. Great opportunity to sign up, get involved. And those of you who are members, we are definitely encouraging you to get involved with the executive directives that are out, because obviously the more members we have, the bigger voice that we have at the negotiating table, and the more difference and the quicker the difference we can actually make. So looking forward to working with all of the members, and let's see where this journey leads us.
Thank you to Natalie Blewitt, the Senior Vice President of the SSTUWA. Now, this process is covered in depth in the March issue of Western Teacher. You'll find it on page 6 when that arrives in your letterbox. And if you're one of the 8,500 members who've now opted into our digital version of Western Teacher, which is fantastic for the environment and for us because you get it a bit quicker, then you can read it in full there. And you're welcome, if you're a rep, to let us know, and we'll pop this up as a poster on the Rep Hub on our SSTUWA website, because we do know people get a little bit confused by what can be a long and exhaustive process. So thanks again to Natalie. Thank you most of all to all of you for listening to the SSTUWA podcast, Western Teacher Live, and keep your eye on the e-news, keep your eye on the website for any new podcasts and any updates about what is happening with the General Agreement negotiation.
Western Teacher Live, cutting through noise on public education and union issues.